Good morning. I'm Bonnie Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our programs are free and occur most Sundays at noon. You're welcome to attend. We're located at 4700 Grover Avenue, and you can find out more about our forums by going to our church website at www.austinuu.org. And our mission is to nourish the mind and spirit and serve social justice. And today, Richard Halpin, one of our forum committee members, is introducing today's speaker, Tom VandeStadt. Richard?
Thank you, Bonnie. Hello, everybody. I'm honored to introduce Tom VandeStadt. He is the pastor of the Congregational Church of Austin and from the United Church of Christ, and a student of Appamata Zen Center in Austin. He has served on the board of the Interfaith Environmental Network of Austin and is currently a member of Austin Interfaith. In addition, here is a man, a brother, who listens to the songs of the mountains, the big sky, and the sacred earth. Here is a man who teaches and shares the sacred and the intimate within. Here is a passionate activist and believer in the miracle of goodness. Please give a warm welcome to our guest, Tom VandeStadt.
Thank you, Richard. I want to thank all of you for inviting me here to speak today. Becky asked me to speak on the topic of Buddhism, Christianity, and climate change. Wow, what a ridiculously huge topic. I told folks at the Zen Center and at the church I was speaking on Buddhism, Christianity, and climate change, and they all just laughed and said, good luck. Today I don't really want to talk about climate change per se or other related issues like species extinction and the loss of biodiversity. I don't feel any need to talk about CO2 levels, carbon budgets, ice melt, sea level rise, drought, or climate refugees. Because you guys know all of that stuff. You know the crisis that we are in, and you know about the good work being done in response. In fact, your church is leading Austin in that good work. Nor do I want to talk about Buddhist and Christian proclamations about climate change or quote a bunch of Buddhist and Christian climate activists. You can easily read the proclamations on the internet, and you, like me, are probably already posting quotes from Thich Nhat Hanh and Desmond Tutu on your Facebook pages. This morning I'd like to go a bit deeper. In his book, The Great Work, Father Thomas Berry writes, the historical mission of our times is to reinvent the human at the species level. Ever since I read that sentence years ago, it has intrigued me to no end. In order to respond to the crisis the human species finds itself in on planet Earth, we must reinvent the human at the species level. That's what I want to talk about today. How practicing the Buddha's way and Christ's way can help bring about a profound transformation in how humans understand themselves and the relationship to the earth, and how humans interact with one another in the earth. So let me start with a story with which you are all familiar. In the book of Genesis, God creates the first human, or Adam, from the dust of the earth. The author of that ancient story derived the name Adam from the Hebrew word Adama, which means dust, soil, earth. Today we know through our scientific knowledge that the human body did indeed evolve from the earth, from water and soil, from the entire biosphere. Without the benefit of our scientific knowledge, the ancient rabbis understood something about humanity's intimate relationship with the earth. Enough, anyway, to name the first human after the earth's soil. We contemporary scientifically minded folks also derive our name from the earth's soil. Homo sapien. In Latin, humus means soil vibrant with life. From humus we derive the words humble and humility, close to the soil, down to earth, well grounded. And homo, man. However, we are not always that humble. We appended the additional title, sapiens, to our name. Homo sapiens, wise man. But how wise are we? A number of people today are warning that humanity is suffering from a crisis of wisdom. Or as I like to put it, Homo has a sapiens crisis. A number of people are warning that climate change, species extinction, the loss of biodiversity, all happening at an alarming pace, and all caused by our species, are symptoms of a deeper crisis within our species. Yes, we will need scientific knowledge and technical know-how to address these issues, but ultimately these issues are symptoms of a deeper crisis. And here's the deeper crisis. Too many human beings on earth perceive that their bodies, their consciousness, their identities, their very lives are separate from the earth. They don't fully realize and appreciate the intimate relationship between themselves and the earth. They have a dualistic view in which they view themselves as subjects and the earth as an object. And as subjects, they see themselves having the right to control, manage, manipulate, exploit, consume, or profit from that object. Pope Francis identified this deeper crisis in his recent encyclical on climate change, when he observed that humans have declared independence from the earth. This is one of the deeper issues I want to address today. The dualistic view that sets people apart from the earth. I call it a crisis of wisdom because from the perspective of Buddhist practice, it is the cultivation of wisdom that overcomes this dualistic view. Now, the relationship between Buddhism and wisdom is a huge topic, and I can only scratch the surface. But I'll do so by talking about three key terms associated with wisdom in Buddhist practice. The terms are emptiness, dependent origination, and impermanence. Let's start with emptiness. Emptiness is the English translation of the Sanskrit word sunyata. You may be familiar with the verse from the Heart Sutra. Emptiness is form, and form is emptiness. This verse conveys the very heart of wisdom from a Buddhist perspective. But what does the word sunyata, translated as emptiness, really convey? To answer that question, I have to throw another Sanskrit word out to you. Svabhava. Svabhava is typically translated into English as own being. And own being answers the question regarding emptiness. Reality is empty of own being. Own being means self-created, self-possessed, independent of others, not subject to outside influences. In short, own being means separate. When Buddhists say reality is empty of own being, they're saying nothing that exists stands on its own or by itself. Nothing is completely independent. Nothing is free from outside influence. Nothing is separate. Reality takes many different particular forms. You, me, trees, clouds, buildings. All forms exist not only within relationships, they exist as relationships. All forms exist as a particular coalescence and organization of relationships. And all forms are related to other forms. Nothing is separate. Reality is empty of own being. So what about dependent origination and impermanence? Dependent origination means nothing creates itself. All forms are created and come into being through relationships. When this interacts with that, something new arises out of that encounter, out of that relationship. Nothing creates itself. And all forms are impermanent because the relationships creating them are contingent, fluid, open to influence, and subject to change. Nothing that exists will exist in its current form forever. Reality is a continuous process. All forms grow, develop, and evolve, decay, dissolve, and erode. Some very slowly like a stone, some more quickly like a human being. So for those who practice the Buddha's way, wisdom includes the profound realization of emptiness, dependent origination, and impermanence. And while this wisdom can be explained through concepts, as I'm trying to do now, it can only be truly experienced, truly realized, truly embodied through meditation. So let's turn to the topic of meditation for a moment. Here's a quick definition of meditation. It's not the only possible definition, and it doesn't include all aspects of meditation, but I think it's a good definition for now. Meditation is the highly focused, sustained study of the self. Meditation is the highly focused, sustained study of the self. Through a highly focused, sustained study of the self, one can experience in a deep and profound way that these attributes I've just described, emptiness, dependent origination, impermanence, all apply to oneself, to me. I am empty of own being. I came into being through the interactions of a vast and complex matrix of relationships, and I now exist as a vast and complex matrix of relationships. Meditation includes a highly focused, sustained study of the relationships that coalesce through time to create this ongoing set of biological, chemical, cognitive, psychological, emotional, cultural, social processes that continuously interact to create this organism, this particular changing form that I experience as me and you call Tom. Furthermore, through a highly focused, sustained practice of meditation, one can experience all of reality as empty of own being. one can experience, one can deeply appreciate the inherent relational nature of all reality, of everything that exists. To paraphrase Thich Nhat Hanh, when one views all reality as empty, every time one picks up a single piece of paper, one sees trees and soil, clouds and rain, a whole biosphere, human labor and all that supports human labor. Anytime one sees anything or anyone, one sees boundless connections, countless relationships. Let me give a bit more detailed example of how I experience emptiness through my meditation practice. I used to think there was an inside of me and an outside of me. And I used to think the inside of me was separate from the outside of me. Inside of me consisted of my internal organs, my thoughts and feelings, my consciousness, my identity, my ego, my sense of self. Tom was inside of me. Outside of me was everything else. The rest of the world, the environment, the culture, society, the political economy. And it was several layers of skin and a bit thicker skull of bone that separated the inside of me from everything outside of me. In other words, I experienced the world in a classic dualistic fashion. Me, a separate self in here, the world, everything else, separate from me, out there. And this is the dominant way of viewing self and world in our culture. Dualistically, me in here, everything else out there. Buddhists call this dualistic view delusion. So meditation and my direct realization of emptiness have completely deconstructed this dualistic view. I now see that on one side of my skin, what I once called inside, there exist numerous sets of highly complex interrelated relationships. My cardiovascular system, my nervous system, my digestive system, my emotional system, my psychological system, so on and so forth. I now see that all of these relational systems on that side of my skin are intimately connected to relational systems on the other side of my skin. All the relational systems on the so-called inside are related to, dependent on, and supported by relational systems on the so-called outside. A vast natural biosphere, family and friends, culture, society, the political economy. I now realize that nothing on the inside could exist without the outside. It is only through the interaction between what is on both sides of my skin that I exist. My skin does not form a barrier that creates a self on the inside separate from the world on the outside. I now see that I am empty of own being. There is no boundary where the world ends and I begin, or where I end and the world begins. I know in my body, I know through my body, that the earth is my larger body. The earth is my larger identity. Or as some put it, I am the earth, conscious of itself through a particular human mind. Which brings up the issue of consciousness. If my skin does not form a barrier that separates my body from the earth, nor does my skull form a barrier that separates my brain, my mind, my consciousness, my identity from the earth. Neuroscientist Evan Thompson, who's also a practitioner of the Buddha's way, describes how our consciousness, our identity, arises through the interaction between our brain and the earth. Or more specifically, between what is inside our brain and what our brain is inside. What is inside our brain? Cells, lobes, neurons, neural networks, and so on. But what is our brain inside? Our brain is inside a particular body with a particular skin color and myriad other biological attributes. Our brain is inside a particular bioregion with a particular landscape and climate. Our brain is inside a particular family system with its own particular family history, issues, and dynamics. Our brain is inside a particular culture and perhaps one or more subcultures. Our brain is inside a particular society, a particular political economy, and so on and so forth. Our particular consciousness, our particular identity arises through the interplay of what is inside our brain and what our brain is inside. Now, according to Thompson, when it comes to forming our consciousness and our identity, what is inside our brain is important. But what our brain is inside is even more important. Because what our brain is inside conditions our thought processes, our view of the world, our beliefs, our emotional makeup, our attitudes, our values, our desires, our experiences of self. And again, this is where meditation comes in. Meditation is the concentrated, sustained study of how one's thought processes, one's view of the world, one's beliefs, one's emotional makeup, one's attitudes, one's values, one's desires, one's identity are conditioned by one's body, by the bioregion within which one lives, by one's family, by the culture, the society, the political economy within which one lives. Everything one's brain is within affects how one views oneself, how one views other people, how one views other species, how one views the earth. So ask yourself, how does the dominant culture, the dominant society, the dominant political economy in which we live condition people's minds and consciousness? How does it condition people to view reality in certain ways? How does it condition people to habitually think and act in certain ways? Here's the quick answer. In ways that have led people to believe the delusion that they are separate from the earth. In ways that have led people to create the conditions we call climate change, species extinction, the loss of biodiversity. It is only by studying how my mind has been conditioned by what my brain is inside, by studying how I am caught up in habits of thinking, habits of feeling, and habits of acting, that I can liberate myself from those habits and respond to the world in ways that are more appropriate. That is why meditation is so transformative and so potentially subversive to the dominant and destructive status quo. Meditation is the act of liberating our mind from the dominant destructive ways of thinking, and thereby liberating our body from dominant, destructive ways of acting. And from a Buddhist perspective, the most dominant, the most destructive way of thinking is dualistic thinking. Me inside, separate from everything else outside. And the most destructive way of acting is dualistic acting. Me, the subject, controlling, managing, manipulating, exploiting, consuming, or profiting from the object. If more humans stopped seeing themselves as separate from the earth's humus and instead cultivated a deep and profound embodied experience of intimate relationship with the earth, our species would be living on this earth in a much different way. However, even while living within the dominant, destructive way of thinking and acting, we can put an end to our own dualistic thinking and acting. We can realize deeply and profoundly our intimate relationship with the earth. We can see trees and soil, clouds and rain, a whole biosphere, human labor and all that sustains human labor. Every single time we see a sheet of paper, we can see the boundless connections, the countless relationships in everything and everyone we see. And then we can act accordingly. We can act appropriately. Again, knowing that we are that part of the earth that is conscious of itself through our human minds. That we are that part of the earth's body working to heal itself through the actions of our human body. For me, this addresses Thomas Berry's call for the reinvention of the human at the species level. A deep, profound, fundamental transformation of how we experience who we are and what it means to be human within this larger body we call the earth. I'd like to shift gears now and talk about another deep, profound, and fundamental transformation. This time from a Christian perspective. I've identified dualistic thinking as one of the culprits that lies at the heart of human-caused climate change, species extinction, and the loss of biodiversity. Another culprit is our human tendency to be self-centered and self-aggrandizing, toward being preoccupied with myself and with seeking to build myself up to get more for myself. This, of course, is related to dualistic thinking, and Buddhist practice most certainly addresses human self-centeredness. However, I'd like to address this issue from a Christian perspective because it gets to the very heart of Christian spirituality. In trying to convey something about wisdom in Buddhist practice, I talked about emptiness. It turns out that in Christian spirituality, we talk about emptiness as well. The kenosis of Christ. The self-emptying of Christ. The Greek word kenosis, translated into English as empty. When talking about the self-emptying of Christ, I like to refer to Walter Wangerin's short story, The Ragman, because it illustrates so well Christ-like kenosis. If you're not familiar with the story, here are the basics. The Ragman is a big, healthy, robust man who goes about town yelling at the top of his lungs, "New rags for old! I exchange brand new rags for your old rags." But the ragman exchanges more than rags. When he comes across a woman sitting on a back porch, sobbing and weeping into her handkerchief, he takes her tear-soaked handkerchief, slips her a brand new one, then walks off, sobbing and weeping into her handkerchief. The ragman sees a child, her head wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage, blood streaming down her forehead. He unwraps the bandage from her head, ties it around his own, and then places a brand new yellow bonnet on her head. As he walks away, his blood flows from a wound in his head. The ragman encounters an unemployed man wearing a dirty old jacket and missing one of his arms. The ragman gives the man his brand new jacket along with one of his own arms and then puts on the old man's jacket. After lifting a dirty blanket from a drunken man lying unconscious on the ground and giving him a brand new blanket, the ragman stumbles off, drunk and exhausted, one arm missing, bleeding from his head, sobbing. The ragman heads to the town dump, climbs to the top of a heap of garbage, and dies. 3 days later, he rises, brand new. The ragman is clearly a Christ figure. He takes the pain and suffering of humanity upon himself and in turn offers humanity healing and wholeness. He sacrifices himself for others, and 3 days after dying on a garbage heap, he's resurrected. Now, it's easy to simply venerate the ragman as a Christ figure, but followers of Christ are called to emulate the ragman, to do what he does throughout the story. What does the ragman do? The ragman exchanges. He exchanges new rags for old, joy for despair, health for sickness, wholeness for brokenness, sobriety for drunkenness, life for death. In doing so, the ragman demonstrates a fundamental ethic towards exchange. Whenever you exchange something, seek to give more than you receive. Seek to give something of greater value than you take. Don't be self-centered. Don't put yourself first. Put the other first. Don't seek gain for yourself. Seek to benefit the other. This is a basic orientation of Christ himself. I can practically hear Christ say, "Blessed are you who give to others more than you take from them. Woe to you who take from others more than you give to them." Okay, so we don't find those precise words in the Beatitudes. But seriously, can you hear Christ say, "Blessed are you who take more from others than you give to them"? No, that's ridiculous. Christ's whole approach to life is to give more than you take. Put the other first. Seek to benefit the other rather than yourself. Kenosis, self-emptying, in a Christian context means the emptying of self-centeredness, the emptying of one's desire to get more than others, to get the upper hand over others, to get ahead of others. Now, the fact of the matter is, we live in a world in which people are quite often preoccupied with self. A world where people often seek to get more than they give. Our dominant economic system, with its profit motive, is based on the premise that each person should seek to come out ahead on all of their exchanges. Take more than they give. Accumulate. Our dominant economic system is not only built on the premise that humans are inherently self-centered and self-aggrandizing, motivated by profit-seeking, it encourages and legitimizes, valorizes, and rewards self-centered, and self-aggrandizing thinking and behaving. But we see that this self-centered approach to life leads to great exploitation, injustice, and human suffering. It creates huge gulfs between the wealthy who come out way ahead of the exchange game and the poor who come out way behind. And it causes tremendous damage to the earth as we take more and more and more from the earth, as we exploit, consume, and profit from the earth, taking from the earth not just what humans need, but what humans desire in order to come out ahead of other humans. And all the while, giving back to the earth much less or much worse than we are taking from it. And again, here's where the ragman story, as well as Christian liberation and eco-justice spirituality, are instructive. The ragman goes directly to those who are hurting the most, those who are suffering the most, the poor, the downtrodden, those at the bottom. Likewise, Christian liberation and eco-justice spirituality makes an explicit connection between the suffering of the earth's biosphere and the suffering of the earth's poor people, by exposing how the earth suffers the most in those very places where the poor of the earth live. The earth suffers from more exploitation, abuse, and degradation in those very places where poor people suffer from exploitation, abuse, and degradation. This means poor people suffer even more because of the harm done to the earth where they live. It's a vicious downward spiral. Abuse the earth where the poor live and make the poor suffer the consequences of degraded, polluted, despoiled land, water, and air. And so, the ragman, the Christ-like person, in a true act of humility, takes a downward spiral oneself, seeking to get closer and closer to the suffering earth and to the earth's suffering poor, until he or she becomes one with them, seeking with every exchange to give to the earth and to the poor more than or better than whatever one takes from them, seeking to prioritize their needs over one's own. This is the deepest, most profound, most challenging meaning of Christian kenosis. The emptying of status, privilege, and possessions. Now I confess, this is an aspirational spirituality for me. To really give more than I take, to really submit to that downward spiral that self-emptying entails, it's extreme. Christ was extreme. I confess that I don't take it to the extreme that Christ took it. And yet Christ inspires me and challenges me to be heedful and vigilant of how much I do take and how much I give. To be aware of what I take and what I give. From whom I take and to whom I give. To take less and to give more. From other people and from the earth. Here's a quick thought experiment. Imagine if everyone was motivated. Not by profit, not by self-gain, but by the desire to give to others more than they took from others. If that were the case, then every single person on earth would act towards others with extreme generosity. No one would ever try to take advantage of anyone else. No one would ever try to come out ahead of anyone else or try to have more than anyone else. No one would seek to accumulate more than others. Everyone would be concerned that the other person has enough, that other people's needs are being met. Extreme, excessive, extravagant generosity. Imagine how it would change the world. No more injustice, exploitation, oppression. No rich and poor. And imagine if we treated the earth that way. Always asking ourselves, can we give back to the earth more than we take from the earth? Can we add something wholesome, life-enriching, or beautiful to the earth rather than depleting the earth or dumping our poisons upon the earth? Again, this addresses Thomas Berry's call for a reinvention of the human at the species level. A deep, profound, fundamental transformation of what motivates humans to act in this world. As I said at the outset, to truly address our crises of climate change, species extinction, and loss of biodiversity, we need scientific knowledge and technical know-how. But we need more than that. We need a deep, profound transformation of the human heart and mind. A transformation of how we human beings experience and understand our place and our role as part of this earth. If we continue to see the earth as a separate object to manage or control, and if we continue to think and act in self-centered ways, then our advances in science and technology will be put to use to continue treating the earth as an object. And they'll be put to use so that some can continue to profit at the expense of others. And that's not much of a vision for a better future. A profound transformation of the human heart and mind. A maturing of the human heart and mind. We humans must grow up. Only then can we truly live up to the name that we have given ourselves. Homo sapiens, the wise ones. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, I know there are going to be some questions. Would you raise your hand?
You didn't talk much about growth, at least directly. And an obvious comment is that if you have exponential growth in a finite system, you run into limits fairly quickly. Could you comment on growth, particularly population growth, in regards to the philosophy you've been presenting?
Well, I think economic growth clearly is an issue that we need to look at as a species on this earth. It is growing exponentially. We are outrunning the resources that we have on this earth, especially with the economic model that we have of continued growth. And I think what I identified as that tendency we have to self-centeredness, it's all related. And clearly, I don't have the solution to how we deal with human population growth, but it is certainly a serious topic. And it's also profoundly and intimately related to issues like poverty. Because people who live in poverty do tend to have a lot of children in order to ensure that there will be people to continue to work and provide. And so it's clearly a a huge, again, another one of those huge issues. I don't have the solution, but it's clearly something that we need to look at, is human population growth and the number of humans on this planet.
Thank you so much, Tom, for your talk today. And in your talk, you made me think that there is for lack of a better way to explain this, kind of a highway that exists when we think others, when we meditate. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that place where spirits can meet, that place where consciousness can come together when we empty ourselves of who we thought we were and remember who we are. Isn't there a place where we all can connect? And if that's true, then if we connect on that place, we ought to be able to kind of throw the switch on things and make things different.
Yeah, I mean, I work at a church and I'm a student at a Zen center. And in the church, I work very hard in helping bring people together in order to mature as individuals and also to mature as a community. And maturing as individuals and as a community involves bringing people together in more intimate relationships with one another and sharing with one another what it is that unites us in our common experience of being human. And that's a whole lot of things. There's a lot of pain and suffering there. There's a lot of joy there. But that kind of community building and the deconstructing of the barriers that tend to separate us, that, for me, is the ultimate definition of spirituality. It's also what we practice at the Zen Center. And I imagine that happens here as well. And I think this is a role that spiritual communities have to play, because I think spiritual communities are best equipped to do that type of work. And I think more and more spiritual communities are seeing that this is what spirituality is all about. I think more and more spiritual communities are understanding that it's not about doing something right in this life so that we get to a better place after we leave the earth, a better place after we die. No, spirituality is about maturing as individuals and a community while we're here, because this life is it, and that is the way to enhance life on this planet. So there are a number of spiritual practices that individuals and communities can do together to break down those barriers that separate us and that bring us into a deeper union with one another. In Christianity, we call that Holy Communion, which means holy union with. And we talk about being in holy union with one another and with the earth through Christ. And Christ, of course, is that self-emptying love.
Thank you, Tom, for your presentation and your perspective today. My question is, how do we move to get your philosophy of Christianity with this holistic approach? How do we get that accepted by the mainstream of Christians in America? It's hard for me, for instance, to imagine some political leaders, self-proclaimed Christians, such as Ted Cruz and even George W. Bush, accepting this type of philosophy. And so how do we move to make this part of mainstream thought and acceptance?
If I could answer that question, I rack my brains with that question every single day. That is the preeminent question that I ask myself as the pastor of the church where I pastor. How do we do that? I think there is a movement, though, in American liberal progressive Christianity, and even in some of the conservative evangelical sides of Christianity, to do that. It's a long process. I think that people like me, people like this church, a number of the liberal progressive churches in Austin need to find every vehicle they can find to get our spirituality out there, our message out there, to make connections with one another and to build a spirituality-based climate healing movement. in whatever vehicle we can use to get that message out there and draw people in, I think is good. I think a lot of people are leaving the mainline church because the mainline church no longer serves their spiritual needs. And I think there are a lot of people who are looking for a place like this and looking for a place like my church, but they don't even really know such places exist. So we really rack our brains trying to figure out how can we get this message out there, because we're convinced that there are a lot of people out there who want this kind of spiritual community. But it's a tough one. It's a tough question.
First, I applaud your presentation. I think it's wonderful.
Thank you.
As a biologist, I've been in touch with most of what you've addressed in a physical and spiritual connection for decades. You touched on this matter, which I'm going to ask you about a few minutes ago, but I'd like to, if you could attempt to respond to this, that along with our redefining our relationship with the earth, part of what our strong survival instinct drives us into is a serious fear of death. Mm-hmm. And I think the gross magnification of that in cultures which are very separated from the earth, like higher technical cultures ourselves, is pushing our resource depletion just to the brink. And I think that part of this problem is redefining our concept of death, our relationship with death itself.
Wow, that's a great point. I would applaud you for raising that point. Thank you. I think you're absolutely right. And I know that in the Christian church, we've not really addressed that issue in an adequate fashion. Whereas in the Zen Buddhist practice that issue is at the forefront. The issue of death. The issue of death is at the forefront. And I'm not exactly sure what your question is there, but all I can say is I agree with you. And in Buddhist practice, the issue of death and impermanence, arising and passing, is at the forefront. And the practice of not being attached to our identity, not being attached to our possessions, and understanding in a very deep way that this body on this earth is impermanent, and that this body will die, and that my consciousness will come to an end, is something that we practice accepting as reality that cannot be avoided. Not as well done in the Christian practice. And again, I see that the whole focus in some aspects of Christianity where they want the better life in the world to come as addressing that fear, but not really addressing that fear. And there's nothing that bothers me more than when somebody dies and somebody else says, they've been called home. What are you talking about? The earth is our home. There's not some other home up there in the sky. This is our home.
As you were talking, an image of Appalachia, for example, was conjured up. The environmental degradation, the exploitation of the earth through the extraction industries, be it first forestry and then mining, and how the motives of the mining magnates are so very different. They're oriented towards profiteering at any cost, in contrast to the many volunteers that have gone to Appalachia over the years, church-sponsored, Vista, other charitable groups, and how the two groups probably have very little understanding of the different motives and perspectives of both of these groups. And how do you work towards helping sensitize or alert or educate or convince those who are in positions of power of the necessity to consider stewardship of the earth?
Yeah, again, I mean, that's such a huge question. That's such a huge question. I don't have the answer. I don't know that anybody has the answer. And the fact is, you may never convince people. You may never convince people whose hearts and minds are so oriented, so conditioned, so habituated to thinking and acting in that way. So you do what you can. But I also think that a lot of effort should be, and I think a lot of effort is going into creating the alternative. Creating the alternative. Not only trying to dismantle what currently exists that's destructive and harmful, but putting a lot of energy and effort into creating the alternatives that are better. So, creating the wind power, the solar power, working to create that spirituality that sees the world in a different way. And the question is, will one develop fast enough to address the damage that's being created? I think that's where we hang in the balance, because so much has been destroyed and the processes of destruction are still so powerful. Can we slow that down enough and create the alternatives fast enough? We'll see. We'll see.
We are down to about 2 minutes, and would you be willing to give us a closing statement, Tom?
Wow, closing statement. I just want to thank all of you at the Unitarian Church for all the work that you do, because, as I said at the beginning, and I wasn't just saying this to be nice, you guys really are a leader, if not the leader, in the city of Austin for creating this spirituality. I felt like I was preaching to the converted this morning, but it's good to share and reinforce that message with one another. But you really are at the forefront of creating that spirituality and then creating that alternative, putting into practice, creating a community right here in this geographic space that is as energy efficient in earth healing as possible, but then encouraging every single member of your community to do that where they live, and then to just send this message and create those connections wherever you can. So I just want to applaud and thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for sharing your vision and a possible pathway forward with us this morning. Let's give him a big hand. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.